December 1993. Cedar Ridge, Washington. The rain drummed against the windows of the small farmhouse like skeletal fingers tapping an urgent warning. Elena Hartwell pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she stood at the kitchen sink, watching the last light of day dissolve into the gray Washington wilderness. At 38, she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had learned to weather storms, both literal and metaphorical. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her scrubs bore the telltale signs of another grueling 12-hour shift at Cedar Ridge General Hospital. But tonight, something felt different, wrong, somehow. Elena had always trusted her instincts. As a pediatric nurse, she'd learned to read the subtle signs that others missed. The way a child's breathing changed just before a crisis, the shadow that crossed a parent's face when they weren't telling the whole truth. Tonight, that same intuitive alarm was sounding, though she couldn't quite place why. The sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires broke through her reverie. She glanced at the digital clock on the microwave. Marcus would be home soon with Dylan, back from their weekend fishing trip to the coast. The thought should have brought her comfort, but instead it only amplified the strange anxiety that had been building in her chest all day. Elena met Marcus Tank Blackwood 2 years ago at a truck stop diner outside Olympia. She'd been grabbing coffee during a break between shifts, and he'd been hauling a load of timber down from the Canadian border. At 6'4" and 240 pounds, Tank was impossible to miss. A gentle giant with calloused hands and kind brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. What struck her most wasn't his imposing physical presence, but the way he'd quietly paid for an elderly man's coffee when he thought no one was looking. Their courtship had been slow, careful. Both had been burned before. Elena's divorce from Vincent Cross had been finalized just months before she met Tank, a bitter, drawn-out battle that had left her emotionally drained and financially strapped. Tank's relationship with Sarah Chen, mother of his 9-year-old son Dylan, had ended amicably enough, but the custody arrangement remained a constant source of delicate navigation. When Tank moved into Elena's isolated farmhouse in the fall of 1991, it felt like the first time in years that she could truly breathe. The property sat on 12 acres of dense forest, accessible only by a winding dirt road that dead-ended at their front. It was perfect for a woman who valued privacy and a man who spent most of his time navigating the chaos of interstate highways. But isolation, Elena was beginning to learn, could be a double-edged sword. The headlights swept across the living room windows as Tank's diesel pickup rumbled up the drive. Elena heard car doors slam, followed by the excited chatter of 9-year-old Dylan recounting their weekend adventures. She forced a smile and opened the front door just as they reached the porch. "Elena." Dylan burst through the doorway first, his dark hair tousled and his cheeks flushed from the cold. "You should have seen the fish Tank caught. It was like this big." He stretched his arms wide, nearly knocking over a lamp in his enthusiasm. Tank followed, carrying a cooler in one hand and Dylan's overnight bag in the other. His smile faltered slightly when he saw Elena's expression. After 2 years together, he could read her moods as easily as she could read his. "Everything okay, darling?" he asked, setting the cooler down and pulling her into a brief embrace. She breathed in his familiar scent, cedar shavings, diesel fuel, and something uniquely him that she could never quite name. "Just tired," she replied, but Tank's brown eyes searched hers with concern. "How was the coast?" "Cold as hell, but Dylan caught his first salmon," Tank said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Kids got natural instincts, knew exactly when to set the hook." Dylan beamed at the praise, and Elena felt her heart clench with unexpected emotion. Tank had been more of a father to Dylan in 2 years than Vincent had been to her son Christopher in his entire 11 years of life. The thought of Vincent brought a familiar chill to her spine. "Speaking of Christopher," Elena said carefully, "Vincent called while you were gone. He wants to pick him up Wednesday for an extra visit." Tank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's 3 days before your custody agreement says he gets him for Christmas break." "I know, but you know how he gets when—" The phone's shrill ring cut through their conversation. Elena glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. "Vincent Cross. Again." Tank noticed her hesitation. "Want me to answer it?" Elena shook her head and picked up the receiver. "Hello, Vincent. We need to talk." Vincent's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Now, Vincent, it's nearly 8 o'clock, and Dylan's here. Whatever this is about can wait until no, it can't wait. I know what your boyfriend's been doing to Christopher. Elena's blood ran cold. Beside her, Tank stiffened. Dylan, sensing the sudden tension in the room, quietly retreated to the living room and turned on the television. What are you talking about? Elena kept her voice level, but her free hand trembled slightly. Don't play dumb, Elena. Christopher told me how that oversized boyfriend of yours has been disciplining him. Laying hands on my son. That's not Vincent. Tank has never hurt Christopher, ever. Bullshit. I'm coming over. No, you are not. It's late. And the line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like an angry wasp. Tank gently took the phone from her hand and replaced it in the cradle. What did he say? Tank's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. He thinks you have been hurting Christopher. Tank's face darkened. You know I would never. I know. Elena placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. I know you wouldn't, but Vincent, when he gets an idea in his head. They both knew Vincent's history, the subtle threats, the way he'd twist Christopher's words during their court-mandated visits. The restraining order Elena had briefly considered filing after one particularly volatile encounter outside Christopher's school. Maybe I should take Dylan back to Sarah's tonight, Tank said quietly. No. Elena's response was immediate and firm. This is your home. Dylan is supposed to stay through Christmas. I won't let Vincent's paranoia dictate how we live our lives. But even as she said the words, Elena felt the familiar knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Vincent had been increasingly erratic since their divorce was finalized in November. The custody battle over Christopher had grown more bitter with each passing month, and Tank's presence in their lives had become a constant source of friction. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Vincent had been watching the house, had been documenting Tank's comings and goings, had been building a case in his own twisted mind that would soon explode into something far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. Later that evening, after Dylan had fallen asleep on the couch and Tank had retreated to his workshop to tinker with a carburetor, Elena found herself standing at the kitchen window again. The rain had stopped, but the darkness beyond the glass seemed heavier somehow, more oppressive. She thought about the conversation she'd had with her sister Rebecca earlier that week. Rebecca lived in Seattle, 3 hours away, and had been encouraging Elena to spend Christmas with her family instead of staying isolated in the Cedar Ridge house. I don't like the idea of you being so far out there with all this Vincent drama, Rebecca had said. Why don't you and Tank and the boys come to the city? The kids would love it, and you could use a break from all the stress. Elena had declined, as she always did. The farmhouse was her sanctuary, the first place she'd ever lived that felt truly hers. But tonight, surrounded by the vast darkness of the forest, sanctuary felt more like a trap. A sudden thud from somewhere outside made her jump. She peered through the window, trying to penetrate the shadows beyond the porch light's reach. Probably just a raccoon getting into the garbage, she told herself, or a branch falling from one of the massive fir trees that surrounded the property. But the sound had been too heavy, too deliberate for either of those explanations. Tank? She called softly. No response. He was probably wearing his noise-canceling headphones while he worked. Elena grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped onto the back porch. The cold night air bit through her thin sweater, raising goosebumps along her arms. She swept the flashlight beam across the yard, illuminating patches of muddy grass and the dark outline of Tank's workshop about 50 yards from the house. Nothing. She was about to turn back inside when she caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the tree line, a flash of pale fabric, there for a moment and then gone. Elena's heart began to pound as she aimed the flashlight in that direction, but the beam only penetrated about 20 feet into the dense woods. Hello? She called out, immediately regretting it. If someone was out there, someone who shouldn't be, announcing her presence was probably the worst thing she could do. The forest remained silent except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustle of wind through the evergreen branches. Elena backed toward the house, keeping the flashlight trained on the woods. She was almost to the door when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car engine starting somewhere down the long driveway beyond the bend that hid the main road from view. Fear shot through her like ice water. She stumbled back into the house, quickly locking the door behind her and checking to make sure Dylan was still sleeping peacefully on the couch. Then she hurried to the workshop, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tank. She pounded on the door until he appeared, pulling off his headphones with a concerned frown. "What's wrong? You look like you have seen a ghost." "Someone was out there, in the trees. I heard a car leaving." Tank's expression immediately hardened. He grabbed a heavier flashlight from his workbench and stepped outside, scanning the yard with methodical precision. "Stay with Dylan," he instructed. "Lock the doors. I'm going to check the perimeter." Elena wanted to protest, to tell him not to go into those dark woods alone, but she knew that tone. Tank had served 2 tours in Vietnam before becoming a trucker, and when he shifted into that mode, calm, focused, dangerous, it was better not to argue. She watched from the window as his flashlight beam bobbed through the darkness, occasionally disappearing behind trees before emerging again in a different spot. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, he returned to the house. "Fresh tire tracks at the bottom of the driveway," he reported, his face grim. Whoever it was, they were parked there for a while, the grounds all torn up from them turning around. Elena sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Do you think it was Vincent?" "I don't know, but I'm calling Sheriff Daniels in the morning." That night, Elena lay awake listening to Tank's steady breathing beside her and Dylan's soft snores from the guest room down the hall. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the eaves, made her tense with anticipation. She found herself thinking about her patients at the hospital, children whose trust had been shattered by the very people who were supposed to protect them. She'd always told herself that she was different, that she could keep her own family safe through vigilance and careful choice. But lying there in the darkness, with the memory of those tire tracks fresh in her mind, Elena began to wonder if safety was just an illusion she'd been desperately clinging to. The next morning brought deceptively bright sunshine and the normal chaos of a Monday morning. Dylan had to be driven to school, Elena had an early shift at the hospital, and Tank was scheduled to haul a load of electronics down to Portland. The events of the previous night felt almost surreal in the harsh light of day, but as Elena drove to work along the winding mountain roads, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Several times she glanced in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see Vincent's silver Honda following at a distance, but the roads remained empty except for the occasional logging truck or local farmer heading to town. At the hospital, Elena threw herself into her work with unusual intensity. The pediatric ward was understaffed and overcrowded, as usual, but today she welcomed the distraction. Anything was better than dwelling on the growing sense of unease that had settled over her life like a malignant fog. It wasn't until her lunch break that she had a chance to call Tank. He was somewhere near the Oregon border, his voice crackling with static over the CB radio connection. "Everything quiet at the house?" he asked. "I think so. I called Mrs. Peterson next door and asked her to keep an eye on things while we are both gone." Their nearest neighbor lived almost a mile away, but Betty Peterson was a sharp-eyed widow who missed very little of what went on in their small community. "Good thinking. Listen, Elena, I have been thinking about what happened last night. Maybe we should consider staying somewhere else for a few days, just until things cool down." Elena felt a flash of irritation. "I won't be driven out of my own home by Vincent's mind games." "It might not be mind games anymore, darling. That was real surveillance. Someone spent hours watching our house." The truth of his words settled in her stomach like a stone. Elena had spent so much energy fighting Vincent in court, protecting her legal rights and Christopher's well-being, that she'd perhaps underestimated how far his obsession might have grown. "We will talk about it tonight," she said finally. "But Tank, please be careful on the road." "Always am. Love you." "Love you too." The afternoon passed in a blur of medication rounds and discharge paperwork. Elena was reviewing charts at the nurse's station when her colleague Janet approached with a troubled expression. "Elena, there's a man at the reception desk asking for you. Says he's your ex-husband." Elena's pen slipped from her fingers. "Did he say what he wanted?"
Just that it was urgent family business. Security is with him. But he seems agitated. Elena's mind raced. Vincent had never come to the hospital before. The fact that he was here, in her professional space, felt like a violation of the unspoken boundaries they'd established. "Tell security I will be down in 5 minutes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Janet nodded and hurried away. Elena took a moment to compose herself, checking her reflection in the break room mirror and smoothing her hair back into place. Whatever Vincent wanted, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his presence rattled her. The elevator ride to the main floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, Elena spotted Vincent immediately. He was pacing near the reception desk, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His dark hair was uncombed, his tie askew, and there was a wild look in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "Vincent," she approached cautiously, nodding to the security guard who hovered nearby. "What are you doing here? We need to talk. Privately." His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "This isn't the place. If you want to discuss Christopher's custody schedule, you can call my lawyer. This isn't about the fucking custody schedule." The outburst drew stares from nearby visitors and staff. The security guard stepped closer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice," the guard said firmly. Vincent ignored him, his attention focused entirely on Elena. "I know what you are planning, Elena. I know about the papers your boyfriend filed." Elena's confusion must have shown on her face, because Vincent's expression shifted to something almost triumphant. "You don't know, do you? Your precious Tank filed a motion for emergency custody of his son. Full custody. He's planning to take that boy away from his mother, just like you are trying to take Christopher away from me." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Tank hadn't mentioned anything about changing Dylan's custody arrangement. But then again, his relationship with Sarah had been strained lately. Dylan had been staying with them more frequently, and Sarah had seemed increasingly unreliable about pickup times and visitation schedules. "Even if that's true," Elena said carefully, "it has nothing to do with you or Christopher, doesn't it? You think I don't see what's happening here? You and your boyfriend are playing house with our kids, trying to cut the real parents out of the picture. But I won't let that happen, Elena. I won't let you destroy my family. We are not your family anymore, Vincent." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but Elena was tired of walking on eggshells around his delusions. "We haven't been for over 2 years. Vincent's face darkened. For a moment Elena thought he might actually strike her, right there in the hospital lobby. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his earlier shouting. "You have no idea what you have started," he said, "but you are going to find out very soon." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing frozen by the reception desk, while concerned faces stared at her from all directions. The rest of Elena's shift passed in a haze of anxiety and distraction. She found herself making small mistakes, forgetting to initial a chart, nearly administering the wrong medication to a patient that could have had serious consequences if not caught by her colleagues. By the time she clocked out at 7 p.m., she felt emotionally and physically drained. The drive home seemed longer than usual, the mountain roads darker and more treacherous in the December gloom. Elena found herself checking her mirrors constantly, jumping at every car that appeared behind her headlight. When she finally turned onto the dirt road that led to the farmhouse, she was surprised to see lights already on in the windows. Tank's truck was in the driveway, which was unusual. He'd said he wouldn't be back from Portland until late that night. Elena parked and hurried toward the house, her key already in her hand. Before she could reach the door, it swung open to reveal Tank's concerned face. "Thank God you are home," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I have been worried sick. Your trip ended early. I cut it short after you called. Something in your voice." He shook his head. "I couldn't concentrate on driving. Nearly jackknifed the rig outside Salem." Elena felt a wave of guilt. She'd tried to keep the concern out of her voice when they'd talked, but Tank knew her too well. "Where's Dylan?" she asked, noticing the unusual quiet in the house. "Sarah picked him up an hour ago. Emergency at her work. She needed someone to watch him overnight." Tank's expression was troubled. "Elena, we need to talk about the custody papers." So, Vincent had been telling the truth. Elena felt a mixture of hurt and understanding. Tank had been protecting his relationship with Dylan the same way she'd been protecting her relationship with Christopher, but the fact that he hadn't told her felt like a small betrayal. "When were you going to mention it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I was waiting for the right time. Sarah's been drinking again." Elena. Heavily. "Dylan came to school with bruises last month, and when I confronted her about it, she blamed it on him being clumsy. I couldn't just stand by and—" "I'm not criticizing your decision," Elena interrupted. "I understand why you did it. But Vincent knows Tank. He came to the hospital today, and he's not stable. I think he blames us for some imaginary conspiracy to steal children from their rightful parents." Tank's jaw tightened. "What exactly did he say?" Elena recounted the confrontation at the hospital, watching Tank's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window at the black forest beyond. "I think we should leave," he said finally. "Pack some bags and go stay with your sister in Seattle until after the holidays." "Tank, I'm serious, Elena. This isn't just about Vincent being jealous or controlling anymore. He's escalating. And with us being this isolated," he gestured toward the windows, where the darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. "If something happens, help is 20 minutes away at best." Elena wanted to argue, to insist that they shouldn't let Vincent's threats drive them from their home. But as she stood in the kitchen where she'd felt so uneasy the night before, she couldn't deny the logic of Tank's concerns. "1 week," she said finally. "We will go to Rebecca's for 1 week. Let Vincent cool down, but I won't let him control our lives indefinitely." Tank nodded, relief evident in his features. "I will call Rebecca tonight, explain the situation. We can leave first thing in the morning." But as they began to discuss the practical details of their temporary exile, neither Elena nor Tank noticed the figure watching from the tree line. Vincent Cross had been there for over an hour, close enough to see their silhouettes moving behind the lit windows, far enough away to remain hidden in the forest shadows. In his mind, their conversation wasn't about seeking safety or diffusing tension. It was about running, about guilt, about two people who knew exactly what they'd done, and were finally facing the consequences. Vincent smiled grimly and melted back into the woods. Let them run to Seattle. Let them think they were safe. He had all the time in the world to plan his next move, and he had something they didn't know about, something that would bring them back to Cedar Ridge, whether they wanted to come or not. As he made his way through the dark forest to where his car waited on an old logging road, Vincent thought about the phone call he'd made that afternoon. Sarah Chen had been surprisingly receptive to his suggestion that Tank was an unfit guardian for Dylan. Drunk and bitter about the custody filing, she'd been easy to convince that Tank and Elena were manipulating the system to steal her son. Christmas was still 5 days away, plenty of time for all the pieces to fall into place. In the farmhouse, Elena and Tank continued their planning, unaware that their decision to leave had already been anticipated. They packed quietly, speaking in hushed tones about routes and timing, about how to explain the sudden trip to Christopher and Dylan. Neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched, but when Tank made his final security sweep of the property before bed, he found nothing amiss. The tire tracks from the previous night had been washed away by the morning rain, and the forest seemed as silent and empty as always. But silence, as they would soon learn, could be deceiving. In the guest room, Elena lay awake listening to the old house settle around. Tomorrow they would drive to Seattle, where Rebecca's city apartment would wrap them in light and noise, and the blessed anonymity of urban life. Tonight was their last night in the farmhouse that had been their sanctuary for 2 years. She thought about Dylan, spending the night at his mother's house, while Sarah dealt with whatever work crisis had required an emergency babysitter. She thought about Christopher, safe in his own bed across town, blissfully unaware of the adult tensions swirling around his young life. Most of all, she thought about Vincent, and the wild look in his eyes at the hospital that afternoon. Elena had seen that look before, in the pediatric ward, in the faces of parents who had reached their breaking point. It was the look of someone who had convinced themselves that desperate measures were not only justified, but necessary. As sleep finally claimed her in the early hours of the morning, Elena's last conscious thought was a prayer that they would make it through the next few days without that desperation exploding into something irreversible. She had no way of knowing that for Vincent Cross, the time for desperation had already passed. The real nightmare was about to begin. December 24, 1993. Christmas Eve. The Seattle skyline emerged from the morning fog like a promise of safety as Tank guided his pickup truck through the early Christmas Eve traffic. In the passenger seat, Elena clutched a steaming cup of coffee from their last gas station stop, watching the Space Needle grow larger against the gray December sky. Behind them, Christopher and Dylan dozed fitfully in the back seat, their 9- and 11-year-old bodies finally surrendering to the exhaustion of a 3-hour drive that had begun before dawn. They'd left the Cedar Ridge farmhouse at 4:30 a.m., Tank's paranoia winning out over Elena's desire for a more reasonable departure time. But as they'd loaded their hastily packed bags into the truck bed, both of them scanning the dark tree line for any sign of movement, Elena had to admit his caution felt justified. "Rebecca said she'd have lunch ready when we get there," Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over the cab. "She's excited to meet you properly." Tank nodded, but his attention was divided between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, where he'd been periodically checking for any sign they were being followed. The drive down had been uneventful, no silver Honda lurking behind them, no mysterious vehicles taking the same exits, but the habit of vigilance was hard to break. "What did you tell Christopher about why we are leaving?" Tank asked quietly. "The truth, that Vincent was making threats and we thought it would be safer to spend Christmas somewhere else." Elena glanced back at her son, whose dark hair fell across his closed eyes in a way that made him look younger than his 11 years. He didn't ask many questions. "I think he's tired of the drama too." Christopher had been unusually quiet since Vincent's custody demands had intensified over the fall. Elena suspected her son understood more about the adult tensions than he let on. Children always did. The thought filled her with familiar guilt about the divorce's impact on his young life.
Dylan stirred in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible before settling back against the window. Tank's expression softened as he watched his son in the mirror. "Sarah called this morning while you were in the shower," Tank said. "She wants to pick up Dylan on the 27th." And Elena felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. "Did she say why?" "Some story about her sister visiting from Vancouver." "But her voice?" Tank shook his head. "She sounded different, angry, like she blamed me for something." They both knew Sarah's moods had become increasingly unpredictable since Tank had filed for emergency custody. What they didn't know was that Vincent Cross had spent considerable time on the phone with Sarah over the past week, carefully planting seeds of suspicion and resentment about Tank and Elena's conspiracy to steal children from their biological parents. Rebecca's apartment building stood in the heart of Capitol Hill, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with light. Elena's sister met them at the elevator, her arms already extended for embraces before the doors had fully opened. "Thank God you are here," Rebecca said, pulling Elena into a fierce hug. At 42, she was 4 years older than Elena, but carried herself with the confident energy of someone who'd never been married, never had children, never had to navigate the complex negotiations of domestic life. Her success as a graphic designer had afforded her this loft, this independence, this ability to offer sanctuary when her younger sister's carefully constructed world began to crumble. "Tank, it's wonderful to finally meet you properly," Rebecca continued, extending her hand to the big man who'd been protecting her sister for the past 2 years. "Elena's told me so much about you." Tank accepted the handshake with a shy smile. "All good things, I hope." Mostly, Rebecca grinned, and some of the tension that had been riding Tank's shoulders since Cedar Ridge finally began to ease. The boys perked up immediately upon discovering Rebecca's collection of video games and the spectacular view of Elliott Bay from her living room window. Within minutes, Christopher and Dylan were engaged in an animated battle involving colorful cartoon characters and elaborate sound effects. Their earlier exhaustion forgot. "They will be entertained for hours," Rebecca observed, leading the adults to the kitchen where she'd prepared a spread of sandwiches and soup. "I thought we could let them decompress while we talk about what's really going on." Over lunch, Elena recounted the events of the past week in greater detail than she'd provided during their hurried phone conversations. Rebecca listened with growing concern, occasionally asking pointed questions about Vincent's behavior and the timeline of his escalating threat. "Have you documented any of this?" Rebecca asked, when Elena finished. "Recorded phone calls, saved voicemails, anything that could support a restraining order. I have kept notes, Elena said, but Vincent's careful. He never says anything explicitly threatening. Just unsettling. Lawyers call it plausible deniability. Tank leaned forward, his large hands wrapped around a coffee mug that looked toy-sized in his grip. The thing that worries me most is the surveillance. Someone spent hours watching our house. Rebecca, that's not harassment. That's predatory behavior. Rebecca nodded grimly. She'd worked with enough domestic violence organizations through her design work to recognize the warning signs. How long are you planning to stay here? Through New Year's, if you don't mind, Elena said. Give Vincent time to cool down, maybe realize that his obsession isn't accomplishing anything. You are welcome as long as you need, Rebecca assured them. But Elena, what if he doesn't cool down? What if this is just the beginning? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Elena had been asking herself the same thing for days, but hearing it voiced aloud made the possibility feel more real, more immediate. We will cross that bridge when we come to it, Tank said quietly. Right now, we are safe. The boys are safe. That's what matters. But even as he spoke the words, Tank felt the familiar prickle of unease between his shoulder blades. The same sensation that had kept him alive during 2 tours in Vietnam. Danger had a smell, a texture, a way of changing the very air around you. And despite the warmth and light of Rebecca's apartment, despite the laughter of the children in the next room, Tank couldn't shake the feeling that they'd brought something dark with them to Seattle. December 25, 1993. Christmas Day, Christmas morning in Rebecca's loft, dawned bright and clear, with Mount Rainier visible in crystalline detail beyond the city skyline. The boys woke early, as children do on Christmas, their excitement temporarily overriding the strange circumstances that had brought them to this unfamiliar place. Rebecca had gone all out, providing gifts for both Christopher and Dylan despite having met them only the day before. There were video games and books, art supplies and model airplanes, enough to keep them occupied and distracted from adult conversations about threats and safe housing. Elena watched Tank help Dylan assemble a complex spaceship model, the big man's hands surprisingly gentle as he guided his son through the intricate process. There was something heartbreaking about the scene, this father and son sharing a quiet moment of connection while forces beyond their control swirled around them like storm clouds. Around noon, Dylan approached Elena with an unusual request. Can I call Mom? He asked, his 9-year-old face serious with responsibility. I want to tell her about my presents and wish her Merry Christmas. Elena glanced at Tank, who nodded reluctantly. They'd agreed to maintain normal contact with Sarah, despite their concerns about her recent behavior. Of course, sweetheart. You can use the phone in Rebecca's bedroom for privacy. Dylan disappeared down the hallway, and Elena tried to focus on helping Christopher set up his new art easel. But she couldn't help listening for the tone of Dylan's voice, the cadence of his conversation with his mother. When he emerged 15 minutes later, Dylan's expression was troubled. Everything okay? Tank asked, setting aside the model airplane they'd been working on. Mom sounded weird, Dylan said. She kept asking questions about you and Elena, like whether you guys were being mean to me or making me do things I didn't want to do. Elena felt ice forming in her veins. What did you tell her? The truth, that you guys are nice to me and that I like staying with you. Dylan paused, his young brow furrowed with confusion. But she didn't seem happy about that. She said she might come pick me up early, like maybe tomorrow instead of waiting until after New Year. Tank and Elena exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. If Sarah was considering changing the pickup schedule, it could complicate their plans to stay in Seattle. Worse, it suggested that someone had been filling her head with doubts about Dylan's well-being and their care. Did she say anything else? Tank asked gently. She asked if I wanted to extend my stay with you guys over Christmas break, but when I said yes, she got really quiet. Then she said maybe it would be better if I came home soon. Dylan's voice carried the plaintive confusion of a child caught between adult conflicts he couldn't understand. I don't want to leave early, Tank. I like it here with you and Elena and Christopher. Tank pulled his son into a hug, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. We will figure it out, buddy. Don't worry about the grown-up stuff, okay? But Elena was already worrying.
If Sarah demanded Dylan's immediate return, they'd have to drive back to Cedar Ridge, back to the isolated farmhouse where Vincent could be waiting. The thought filled her with a dread that had nothing to do with inconvenience and everything to do with survival. That afternoon, while the boys played video games and Rebecca prepared Christmas dinner, Tank and Alina retreated to the apartment's small balcony to discuss their options. The December air was crisp but not bitter, and the sounds of the city below provided a comforting backdrop of normalcy. "We could fight it," Alina said. "Sarah can't just unilaterally change the custody schedule without cause. She can if she claims emergency circumstances," Tank replied. "And with the custody motion I filed pending, she might argue that Dylan's in an unstable environment." Alina felt the familiar frustration of being caught in legal tangles that had less to do with what was best for the children and more to do with adult power struggles. "Vincent's behind this, isn't he? Somehow he's gotten to Sarah." Tank nodded grimly. "Has to be. The timing's too convenient. Sarah was fine with the Christmas arrangement when we made it last month. Now suddenly she wants Dylan back early, right after Vincent confronts you at the hospital." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon light paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and amber. Alina thought about the farmhouse in Cedar Ridge, sitting empty and dark among the winter trees. She thought about Vincent, probably spending Christmas alone and nursing his grievances like wounds that refused to heal. "What if we don't go back?" she said suddenly. "What if we stay here permanently? I could transfer to Seattle Children's Hospital. Christopher could enroll in school here." Tank turned to study her face. "You love that house, Alina. It's the first place you have ever lived that was truly yours. Houses can be replaced. Lives can't." The simple truth of her words settled between them like a stone thrown into still water. Tank had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Alina voice it made the possibility feel more real. "Let's see what Sarah decides," Tank said finally. "If she insists on picking up Dylan tomorrow, we will drive back, pack everything we can fit in the truck, and come back here permanently. Make a clean break." Alina nodded, but even as she agreed to the plan, she felt a superstitious chill. In her experience, clean breaks were rarely as simple as they sounded. There were always loose ends, always unfinished business, that drew you back to the very places you were trying to escape. Christmas dinner was a success, despite the underlying tensions. Rebecca had prepared a feast that would have fed twice their number, and the warmth of family connection temporarily overshadowed their worries about Vincent and Sarah and custody battle. Dylan called his mother again after dessert, and this time emerged from the bedroom with better news. "Mom said I can stay until the 27th like we planned," he announced. She sounded happier too. "I think she just missed me." Alina forced a smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's change of heart was somehow more ominous than her earlier demands for Dylan's immediate return. In her experience with domestic conflict, sudden reversals usually meant someone was planning something. That night, as Alina lay in Rebecca's guest bed listening to Tank's steady breathing beside her, she found herself thinking about the children sleeping in the living room. Christopher and Dylan had insisted on camping out together on the pull-out sofa, claiming it was more fun than sleeping in separate rooms. Their quiet laughter and whispered conversations had continued long past their official bedtime, the sound of childhood resilience in the face of adult chaos. Alina had spent her career caring for children in crisis, kids whose parents had failed them, whose trust had been shattered by the very people who should have protected them. She'd always prided herself on being different, on creating a stable, loving environment for Christopher and more recently. But lying there in the darkness, Alina began to wonder if stability was something you could create, or if it was just an illusion that could be shattered by forces beyond your control. Vincent's obsession with their family had already cost them their sense of security in their own home. How much more would it cost before it was over? December 26, 1993. Boxing Day. The day that would change everything began with pancakes and orange juice, with Dylan helping Rebecca flip the batter while Christopher set the table with exaggerated care. The morning light streaming through the loft's enormous windows was the kind of clear, bright illumination that makes everything seem possible, that makes yesterday's fears feel overblown and dramatic. Alina was refilling her coffee cup when the phone. Rebecca answered, her voice cheerful with residual Christmas warmth. "Alina, it's for you," Rebecca said, her expression shifting as she handed over the receiver. "It's Sarah." Alina's stomach clenched as she took the phone. Sarah Chen rarely called her directly, preferring to handle all communication through Tank. "Hello, Sarah." "Alina." Sarah's voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested she'd been rehearsing this conversation. "I need to pick up Dylan today instead of tomorrow." "Today? But it's only the 26th. We agreed." "I know what we agreed, but circumstances have changed. My sister's flight got moved up, and if Dylan's going to see her, I need to get him today." Alina glanced at Tank, who had moved closer to listen. His face was stone, but she could see the storm brewing in his dark eyes. "Sarah, the boys are having such a wonderful time together. Couldn't your sister's visit wait until—" "This isn't negotiable, Alina." Sarah's voice carried an edge that Alina had never heard before. "Dylan is my son, and I want him home, today." There was something in Sarah's tone that reminded Alina, uncomfortably, of Vincent at his most controlling. "Where do you want to meet? I will drive up to Seattle. Meet me at the McDonald's off I-90 at the Snoqualmie Pass exit. 1 o'clock. Alina looked at the kitchen clock. 10:15 a.m. "Sarah, that's almost a 2-hour drive for you each way. Wouldn't it be easier if we—" The line went dead. Alina stared at the silent receiver for a moment before slowly hanging up. Tank was watching her with the expression of a man who'd just seen his worst fears confirmed. "She wants Dylan today," Alina said. "She's driving up to meet us at Snoqualmie Pass." "That doesn't make any sense," Rebecca interjected from across the kitchen. "Why would she drive 4 hours round trip when you could meet her somewhere closer to home?" Tank's jaw was working like he was chewing something bitter. "Because someone told her to. Someone who wants us back in the mountains, away from the city, away from witnessing." The implications of his words settled over the kitchen like a cloud. Alina felt the familiar chill of fear, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Anger. She was tired of Vincent Cross manipulating their lives, tired of adjusting their plans and schedules around his obsession. "We will meet her," Alina said firmly, "but we are not going back to the house. We will hand over Dylan and drive straight back here." Tank nodded, but Alina could see he was already running tactical scenarios in his mind, planning routes and contingencies with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. An hour later they were back on the road, this time heading east into the Cascade Mountains. Dylan sat quietly in the back seat, disappointed about leaving early but accepting the change with the flexible resilience of childhood. Christopher rode beside him, equally subdued, perhaps sensing the tension radiating from the adults in the front seat. The drive to Snoqualmie Pass wound through increasingly rugged terrain, past snow-dusted peaks and valleys thick with Douglas fir and western hemlock. Under normal circumstances, Alina would have found the scenery beautiful, peaceful even. Today, every tree seemed like a potential hiding place, every turn in the road a possible ambush point. "There's the exit," Tank said as they crested a hill and saw the Snoqualmie Pass interchange spread out below them. The McDonald's sat at the junction of two highways, surrounded by gas stations and tourist shops that catered to skiers heading to the nearby slopes. It was busy enough to provide some measure of safety, isolated enough to make Alina nervous. Tank parked where he could watch both the building entrance and the highway approaches. "I don't see Sarah's car yet." Alina checked her watch. 12:55 p.m. "She's probably just running late." But as the minutes ticked by with no sign of Sarah's silver Camry, Alina's unease began to transform into genuine alarm. At 1:15, Tank got out to call Sarah from the payphone near the restaurant entrance. He returned with a grim expression. "No answer at her house. Her work number goes straight to voicemail." "Maybe she's on the road and can't answer," Alina suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. At 1:30, a familiar vehicle pulled into the parking lot. But it wasn't Sarah's Camry, it was Vincent Cross's Honda, with Vincent himself behind the wheel. Alina's blood turned to ice water. "Tank, I see him." Tank's voice was deadly calm. "Stay in the truck, lock the doors." But Vincent wasn't approaching their vehicle. Instead he parked 2 rows away, and simply sat there watching them through his windshield. The message was clear. "I know where you are. I know what you are doing. You can't escape me." "Where's my mom?" Dylan asked, from the back seat, his 9-year-old voice small with confusion. Alina turned to reassure him, but the words died in her throat as she saw a second vehicle entering the parking lot. This one was a Caldwell County Sheriff's cruiser, moving slowly between the parked cars like a predator stalking prey. "What the hell?" Tank started to say, but Alina was already reaching for the door handle. "Stay with the boys," she said. "I need to know what's going on." The deputy who emerged from the cruiser was young, probably in his mid-20s, with the earnest expression of someone who took his job seriously. He approached Alina with his hand resting casually on his service weapon, not threatening but clearly prepared. "Ma'am, are you Alina Hartwell?" "Yes. Is everything all right? We are supposed to meet Dylan's mother here, but Miss Chen called our office this morning," the deputy interrupted. "She's concerned about her son's welfare. Says she has reason to believe the boy might be in danger." Alina felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Danger? That's ridiculous. Dylan is perfectly safe with us." "I'm sure he is, ma'am, but we need to sort this out properly. Miss Chen has asked us to facilitate the custody transfer. Make sure everything goes smoothly." Alina glanced back at Vincent's Honda, where he continued to watch the proceedings with obvious satisfaction. "And I suppose Vincent Cross had nothing to do with this." The deputy's expression remained neutral. "I'm not familiar with that name, ma'am. I'm just here to help with a custody matter." But Alina could see the truth in his eyes. Someone had convinced Sarah that Dylan was in immediate danger. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario to force them out of Seattle and back into Vincent's sphere of influence. "Where is Sarah?" Alina demanded. "If she's so concerned about Dylan, why isn't she here herself?" "She's meeting us at a secondary location, for safety reasons." The words sent a chill down Alina's spine. Secondary location, safety reasons. This wasn't a custody transfer, it was a trap. Tank appeared at her elbow. Dylan's small hand clutched in his large one. "Deputy, I'd like to see some identification and the paperwork authorizing this transfer." The young officer complied, producing a badge and a court document that looked official enough to be genuine. Alina scanned the legal language, noting the emergency custody modification request filed that morning by Sarah Chen, citing credible threats to the child's safety. "This is Vincent's work," Alina said quietly to Tank. "He's convinced Sarah that we are dangerous." Tank nodded grimly. "Deputy, where exactly are we supposed to meet Miss Chen?" "There's a rest area about 15 miles south of here, off highway. More private, better for the family to have their conversation without interruption." Alina looked around the McDonald's parking lot, noting the family's loading ski equipment, the travelers stopping for coffee and gas, witnesses, protection, everything they'd lose if they followed this deputy into the mountains. "I'd prefer to meet here," Alina said. "This is public, neutral ground." The deputy's expression hardened slightly. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but this is how Miss Chen wants to handle it. She has every right to determine the circumstances of picking up her own son." Dylan tugged on Tank's sleeve. "I don't understand what's happening. Where's Mom? Why is everyone talking like I'm in trouble?" Tank knelt to his son's eye level. "You are not in trouble, buddy. The grown-ups just need to sort some things out." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Tank was scanning the parking lot, noting exit routes and potential threats. Vincent's Honda remained stationary, but Tank could see the man's silhouette moving slightly, probably talking on a cell phone. "We will follow you to meet Sarah," Alina said finally, "but I want to understand why this couldn't be handled through normal channels." The deputy nodded. "Just follow my cruiser. And ma'am, for everyone's safety, it would be best if you drove directly there and didn't make any stop." As they walked back to Tank's pickup, Alina felt like she was walking toward her own execution. Every instinct screamed at her to get back on I-90, to drive straight to Seattle and let the lawyers sort out the custody matter. But Dylan was Sarah's son, and legally they had no choice but to comply with her demands. Vincent's Honda pulled out of the parking lot just ahead of them, following the sheriff's cruiser like a malevolent shadow. Tank started his engine and fell into line behind them, Christopher and Dylan chattering nervously in the back seat about the unexpected adventure. As they drove south through the increasingly remote mountain country, Alina found herself thinking about the last conversation she'd had with her sister. Rebecca's question echoed in her mind. What if he doesn't cool down? What if this is just the beginning? Now watching the dark forest close in around them, as they followed Vincent and the deputy deeper into the wilderness, Alina began to understand that this wasn't the beginning at all. It was the end. The rest area turned out to be little more than a gravel pull-off beside a creek, surrounded by towering evergreens that blocked most of the late afternoon light. There were no other vehicles, no facilities, no signs of human presence except for the small caravan that had just arrived. Sarah's silver Camry was already there, parked beside a picnic table where she stood with her arms crossed, her face set in lines of anger and determination that Alina had never seen before. But what made Alina's heart stop was the figure standing beside Sarah, a tall, heavy-set man in a dark jacket, who looked like private security or off-duty law enforcement. "Who is that?" Alina whispered to Tank as they parked. "I don't know, but this is wrong, Alina. Everything about this is wrong." Dylan was already unbuckling his seatbelt, eager to see his mother after several days apart, but Tank caught his arm gently. "Stay close to me, okay, buddy? Don't wander off." As they approached the picnic table, Alina could see that Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed and wild, like someone who hadn't slept in days. The man beside her watched their approach with the predatory stillness of a hunter. "Dylan." Sarah rushed forward to embrace her son, but there was something desperate in the gesture, something that spoke of fear rather than relief. "Hi, Mom," Dylan said, his voice uncertain. "Why are we meeting here? This place is kind of scary." Sarah glanced at the man beside her, then at Vincent, who had emerged from his Honda but remained by the car. "Sometimes scary places are the safest places, baby. Sometimes we have to be careful about who we trust." Alina felt Tank tense beside her. "Sarah, what's this really about? Who is this man? And why couldn't we meet somewhere public?" "This is Detective Morrison," Sarah said, gesturing to the heavy-set man. "He's been investigating some allegations about Dylan's safety." Alina's world tilted. "Allegations?" Detective Morrison stepped forward, his badge visible on his belt. "Ma'am, we have received reports that suggest the child may have been subjected to inappropriate discipline while in your care. We need to conduct a proper interview to determine if there's been any abuse." "That's insane," Tank said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I have never laid a hand on Dylan in anger. Never. That's what we need to determine, sir. In a controlled environment, away from potential coercion." Alina looked around the isolated rest area, understanding now why they'd been brought here. No witnesses, no interruptions, no oversight. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen far from any authority that might question the proceedings. "I want to call my lawyer," Alina said. "Ma'am, this is just a preliminary interview. No one's been charged with anything." But Dylan was looking up at his mother with growing confusion and fear. "Mom, are you saying Tank hurt me? Because he didn't. He's nice to me. He helps me with my homework and teaches me to fish. And baby, sometimes adults hurt children in ways that children don't understand," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Sometimes they make children think it's normal or okay, or stop." Tank's voice cut through the clearing like a blade. "Sarah, look at our son. Really look at him. Does he look like a child who's been abused? Does he act like it? Or does he act like a kid who's been loved and cared for?" For a moment, Sarah's certainty seemed to waver. She looked at Dylan, really looked at him, and Alina could see the conflict playing out across her features. But then her gaze shifted to Vincent, still standing by his car, and her expression hardened again. "I can't take that chance," Sarah said. "I won't risk my son's safety based on what he thinks is normal." Alina felt the situation spinning out of control. "Sarah, please, let's go somewhere public, somewhere safe, and talk about this properly. Whatever Vincent has told you." "Vincent?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "Vincent told me the truth. He told me how you and Tank are planning to steal Dylan away from me, just like you are trying to steal his son away from him." The pieces clicked into place for Alina with sickening clarity. Vincent hadn't just convinced Sarah that Tank was dangerous, he'd convinced her that Alina and Tank were part of some larger conspiracy to destroy families, to steal children from their rightful parents. "Sarah, that's not..." The crack of a branch breaking in the forest behind them made everyone freeze. Detective Morrison's hand moved to his weapon, and Tank instinctively stepped in front of Dylan and Christopher. "Probably just a deer," Morrison said, but his eyes were scanning the tree line with professional alertness. Alina felt the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. They were being watched. She was certain of it. But by whom? And why? "I think we should leave," she said quietly. "All of us. This place, something's wrong here." Vincent chose that moment to approach the group, his movements casual but purposeful. "Everything all right over here? You all look a little nervous." Tank turned to face him, and Alina could see the violence coiled in her partner's shoulder. "You need to leave, Vincent. This is between Tank and Sarah. Actually, I think this concerns all of us," Vincent replied smoothly. We are all just parents trying to protect our children, aren't we? Dylan looked up at the adults surrounding him, his 9-year-old face creased with confusion and growing fear. I want to go home, he said quietly. I want to go back to Tank and Alina's house. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Baby, that's not your home. Your home is with me, but I like it there, and Tank's building me a treehouse, and Alina helps me with my science projects.
That's enough. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Dylan, get in the car. Now. But Dylan didn't move. Instead, he pressed closer to Tank, his small hand clutching at his father's jacket. I don't want to go. Not yet. Can't I stay until after New Year's like we planned? Detective Morrison stepped forward. Son, your mother wants you to come with her. You need to obey your mother. But what if I don't want to? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Alina could see the pain in Sarah's eyes, the recognition that her son was choosing Tank and Alina over her. But instead of softening her resolve, it seemed to harden it. Sometimes children don't know what's best for them, Morrison said gently. That's why they need adults to make the hard decisions. Tank knelt beside his son. Dylan, I need you to listen to me. Your mom loves you very much, and she's worried about you. I want you to go with her, and I want you to be good, okay? But when will I see you again? Tank's jaw worked silently for a moment. I don't know, buddy, but I will always love you no matter what. Alina felt tears stinging her eyes as she watched Tank say goodbye to his son. Possibly for the last time, the cruelty of using a child as a weapon in adult conflict struck her with fresh horror. Dylan hugged Tank fiercely, then turned to Alina. Will you take care of Tank while I'm gone? He gets sad sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking. Of course, sweetheart. And you take care of your mom, okay? As Sarah led Dylan toward her car, Alina noticed Detective Morrison hanging back, his attention focused not on the family drama but on the surrounding forest. His hand remained near his weapon, and his body language suggested someone expecting trouble. Sarah, Alina called out as the other woman buckled Dylan into his car seat. If you ever need anything, if Dylan needs anything, please call us. We are not the enemy here. Sarah paused, her hand on the car door. For a moment, Alina thought she might respond, might acknowledge the truth of Alina's words. Instead, she got in the car and drove away, leaving them standing in the gathering twilight with Vincent and the detective. Well, Vincent said with obvious satisfaction, I think that went well. Tank turned on him with barely controlled fury. You son of a bitch. You used that woman's fear to steal a child from his father. I didn't steal anything, Vincent replied calmly. I simply helped a mother recognize the danger her son was in. Detective Morrison cleared his throat. I think everyone should head home now. It's getting dark, and these mountain roads can be treacherous. But as Alina looked around the empty rest area, she realized they were trapped in a web of circumstances not of their making. Christopher was exhausted and confused. Sarah was gone with Dylan, and they were hours from Rebecca's apartment in Seattle. We should go, Alina said quietly to Tank. There's nothing more we can do here. As they walked back to the pickup, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Vincent's plan extended beyond simply reuniting Dylan with his mother. The detective's presence, the isolated location, the way Vincent lingered as if waiting for something, it all suggested a larger game being played. They were almost to their vehicle when Alina heard it, the unmistakable sound of Dylan's voice calling out from the distance. Not words, but a wordless cry of distress that made every parental instinct in her body scream with alarm. Tank heard it too. He was moving before Alina could even process what was happening, running toward the sound with the desperate speed of a father whose child was in danger. Alina followed, Christopher beside her, all of them plunging into the dark forest where Dylan's cries seemed to be coming from. Behind them, Vincent smiled and got back in his car. The trap was closing, and they'd walked right into it. December 26, 1993, 6:47 p.m. Cascade Mountains. The forest swallowed them like a living thing. Alina crashed through the underbrush behind Tank, branches tearing at her jacket and pine needles slapping against her face as they followed the sound of Dylan's distressed cries deeper into the wilderness. Christopher struggled to keep up beside her, his 11-year-old legs pumping frantically as he tried to match the adult's desperate pace. "Dylan," Tank's voice boomed through the trees, raw with parental terror. "Dylan, where are you?" The cries seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the trunks of massive Douglas firs and bouncing back from invisible ravines. Alina's nursing training kicked in automatically. She found herself listening for specific qualities in the sound that might indicate injury, location, immediate danger. But the acoustics of the dense forest made it impossible to pinpoint exactly where the boy might be. "Tank, wait," Alina called out as she saw him veer toward a steep embankment. "We need to stay together." But Tank was beyond rational thought, driven by the primal imperative to reach his child. He plunged down the slope, sending loose rocks cascading into the darkness below, his massive frame moving with surprising agility through the treacherous terrain. Alina grabbed Christopher's hand, feeling his palms slick with sweat despite the December cold. "Stay close to me, baby. Don't let go." They followed Tank's path down the embankment, Alina's medical experience with trauma helping her navigate the hazardous descent. But as they reached the bottom of the ravine, she realized that Dylan's cries had stopped. The silence was absolute and terrifying. Tank's voice cracked with desperation. "Dylan." Nothing, not even the whisper of wind through the evergreen branches above. Alina felt Christopher's hand tightening in hers. "Mom, where did he go? Why isn't he answering?" Before Alina could respond, a new sound reached them through the darkness, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps moving through the forest floor debris. But these weren't the frantic, crashing sounds of a lost 9-year-old. These were deliberate, measured, purposeful. Someone was hunting. Tank materialized from the shadows ahead, his face grim in the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. "We need to get out of here. Now." "But Dylan." "There's no Dylan." Tank's voice was flat, deadly. It was a recording, a trap. Alina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "I found the speaker about 50 yards that way, hidden under a fallen log. Small cassette player with a timer. Someone recorded Dylan's voice and set it to play on a delay." The implications crashed over Alina like ice water. Vincent hadn't just orchestrated Dylan's removal from their care. He'd used it as bait to lure them into the isolated forest. But why? What could he possibly hope to accomplish here that he couldn't do through legal channels? The answer came to her with sickening clarity. Vincent didn't want legal resolution. He wanted permanent resolution. Final resolution. "We have to get back to the truck," Alina whispered, pulling Christopher closer to her side. Tank nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Problem is, I'm not sure which way we came." In the dark, with all the adrenaline, Alina looked around the ravine, trying to spot familiar landmarks, but the towering trees created a maze of shadows and false paths. They could wander for hours without finding their way back to the rest area, assuming the rest area was even safe to return to. A branch snapped somewhere above them, followed by the soft scrape of fabric against bark. Someone was moving through the forest canopy, tracking them from above like a predator. "This way," Tank whispered, pointing toward what he hoped was the direction they'd come from. "Stay low, stay quiet." They began to climb out of the ravine, Alina's heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give away their position. Christopher moved like a shadow beside her, his child's instinct for hiding serving him well in this nightmare scenario. As they crested the lip of the ravine, Alina caught a glimpse of light through the trees, not the warm yellow glow of the rest area's single light pole, but the harsh white beam of a powerful flashlight sweeping back and forth in a search pattern. "He's between us and the truck," Tank breathed in her ear. Alina's mind raced through their options. They could try to circle around, but that would take them deeper into unfamiliar territory in the dark. They could wait for Vincent to move on, but Christopher was already shivering with cold and shock. Or they could try to get past him, using Tank's military training and the element of surprise. The decision was made for them when Christopher's foot dislodged a loose stone that went clattering down into the ravine below. The flashlight beam immediately swung in their direction, probing through the undergrowth like a malevolent eye. Alina heard Vincent's voice calling out with false concern. "Alina? Tank? I heard someone fall. Are you hurt?" Tank pressed his mouth close to Alina's ear. "When I move, you and Christopher run for the truck. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. Get to a phone and call for help." Tank,
No, this is what I trained for, darlin'. Let me do my job. Before Alina could protest further, Tank was moving, his large frame flowing through the forest with the silent precision of a jungle fighter. Alina lost sight of him almost immediately, but she could track his progress by the way Vincent's flashlight beam jerked and weaved, trying to follow movement that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "Come on," Alina whispered to Christopher, beginning to work their way around the edge of the search area. Quiet as a mouse, they had made it perhaps 100 yards when Vincent's voice rang out again, but this time there was no false concern in it, only cold, satisfied malice. "I know you are out there, Alina. You and that boy. Your boyfriend's skills are impressive, but not impressive enough." Alina froze, Christopher trembling beside her. Something in Vincent's tone suggested he had gained some advantage, had turned the tables on Tank somehow. "You see, I have had months to plan this," Vincent continued, his voice carrying clearly through the still forest air. "Months to study your routines, your habits, your weaknesses. Did you really think you could just run away to Seattle and leave me behind?" Alina's blood turned to ice as she realized Vincent was no longer moving through the forest. His voice was stationary, coming from the same spot, which meant, "Tank's quite protective of you, Alina. Quite willing to sacrifice himself to keep you safe. It's almost touching, really." A new voice joined the conversation, Detective Morrison's measured tones carrying an authority that seemed to fill the forest around them. "Mr. Blackwood, I need you to come out with your hands visible. No one wants anyone to get hurt here." Alina bit back a cry of despair. Morrison wasn't here to help. He was part of Vincent's plan. Whatever was happening in the darkness ahead, Tank was outnumbered and outgunned. Christopher tugged on her sleeve, his young face pale with terror in the moonlight. "Mom, what's happening? Where's Alina pulled her son closer, her mind racing through impossible calculations. If she revealed their position, Vincent would have all of them. If she stayed hidden, Tank might. The sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the forest silence. Alina's world exploded into fragments of horror and disbelief. She found herself running toward the sound before her conscious mind could engage. Christopher's hand still clutched in hers as they crashed through the undergrowth. They emerged into a small clearing where Vincent stood holding a pistol, its barrel still smoking in the cold air. Detective Morrison was beside him, his own weapon drawn but pointed at the ground, and lying motionless in the center of the clearing. Tank. Alina's scream tore from her throat like a physical thing. Tank was on his side, one hand pressed against his shoulder where dark blood seeped between his fingers. But he was alive, conscious, his eyes finding Alina's across the clearing with relief and desperate warning. "Alina, run," he gasped. "Take Christopher and nobody's running anywhere," Vincent said calmly, swinging his pistol to cover Alina and Christopher. "The family's finally all together. Isn't that nice?" Detective Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Vincent, this wasn't the plan. You said we were just going to question them. Maybe scare them a little. You didn't say anything about plans change." "Detective." Vincent's voice carried the cold satisfaction of a man who had finally achieved complete control over a situation. Sometimes circumstances require improvisation. Alina found herself studying Morrison's face, noting the uncertainty there, the growing realization that he had been manipulated into something far beyond what he'd agreed to. But whether that uncertainty would translate into help for her family remained to be seen. "Vincent, whatever you think we have done to you, whatever grievances you have, Christopher and Dylan are innocent children. They don't deserve to be part of this." Vincent's laugh was like breaking glass. "Innocent? Alina, you have poisoned my son against me. You have turned him into a weapon to destroy my parental rights, and your boyfriend there has done the same thing with Dylan. You have both corrupted the natural order of families, turned children against their biological parents." Alina realized she was listening to the voice of genuine madness, not the theatrical insanity of movie villains, but the quiet, systematic delusion of someone who had constructed an entire alternate reality to justify the unjustifiable. "Where's Dylan?" Tank asked through gritted teeth, still applying pressure to his wounded shoulder. "Where's my son?" Vincent smiled. "Dylan is safe, for now. Whether he stays safe depends on how cooperative you all are." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Alina felt Christopher pressing against her side, his small body rigid with terror. In her peripheral vision, she could see Tank calculating distances, angles, possibilities for action despite his injury. "What do you want?" Elena asked. "I want my life back," Vincent replied. "I want my son to love me the way he used to before you and your boyfriend started filling his head with lies. I want the natural order restored." "And how exactly do you propose to accomplish that?" Vincent's smile widened. "Well, Elena, that's where things get interesting. You see, Tank here is going to confess to killing you. He's going to explain how your relationship went sour, how his jealousy and controlling nature finally erupted into violence. Very tragic, really." Elena felt the blood draining from her face. "And then what? You think Christopher will just accept that? You think Dylan will forgive you for murdering his father? Children are resilient, Elena. They adapt. And with the right guidance, the right explanation of events, they will come to understand that Tank was the monster in this story, that I was just trying to protect them." Detective Morrison took a step forward. "Vincent, this has gone far enough. Whatever problems you have with these people, murder isn't the solution." Vincent turned the gun on Morrison with casual efficiency. "Detective, I'm afraid you are either part of the solution or part of the problem. Which is it going to be?" Elena watched Morrison's face cycle through a series of emotions: fear, anger, calculation, resignation. She realized that Vincent had compromised the detective somehow, drawn him into the conspiracy through threats or blackmail, or promises that were now being revealed as lies. "I won't be part of murder," Morrison said quietly. "Then you will be a victim of it," Vincent replied, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot seemed impossibly loud in the confined space of the clearing. Morrison spun and fell, clutching his leg where the bullet had shattered his thigh. His service weapon went spinning away into the darkness. Christopher screamed and buried his face against Elena's side. Elena found herself moving without conscious thought, dropping to her knees beside Morrison to assess his wound with professional detachment. The bullet had missed the femoral artery, but the detective was losing blood fast and would need immediate medical attention. "Very touching, Elena. Always the caretaker." Vincent's voice carried a mockery that made her skin crawl. "But I'm afraid Detective Morrison's condition is the least of your worries." Elena looked up to find Vincent's gun pointed directly at her chest. Behind him, Tank was struggling to his feet, despite his wounded shoulder, but Vincent was too far away for him to reach before the trigger could be pulled. "Vincent, please, Christopher is right here. He's just a child. Whatever you do to me, he will see it. He will remember it for the rest of his life. Children see terrible things all the time, Elena. The strong ones survive, the weak ones, well, natural selection takes care of them." Elena realized with crystalline clarity that she was looking at a man who had moved completely beyond the boundaries of human empathy. Vincent wasn't just planning to kill her, he was planning to enjoy it. The knowledge filled her with a cold, clean rage that burned away her fear. "You are not going to get away with this," she said. "People know where we are. Rebecca is expecting us back. Sarah will ask questions about what happened to Dylan. Sarah believes Dylan is in immediate danger from Tank's violent tendency. She's prepared to disappear with the boy if necessary to protect him. As for Rebecca," Vincent shrugged, "tragic accidents happen in the mountains all the time. Families get lost, fall into ravines, freeze to death. Very sad but not uncommon." Elena felt the pieces of Vincent's plan clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He wasn't just planning to kill her, he was planning to stage their deaths to look like an accident, or, failing that, to frame Tank for the murders and then eliminate the witnesses. "The only question," Vincent continued, "is whether you are going to make this easy or difficult. Easy means a quick death for you and Tank, and Christopher gets to live with his loving father. Difficult means, well, let's just say children can suffer a great deal before they die." Elena looked at her son, seeing her own green eyes reflected in his terrified face. Christopher had been through so much already. The divorce, the custody battles, the constant tension between the adults who were supposed to protect him. Now in what might be his final moments, she wanted to give him something more than terror. "Christopher," she said softly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do you remember the game we used to play when you were little? Hide and seek in the dark?" Christopher nodded mutely. "I want you to play that game now. When I say go, you run into the forest and you hide. You hide so well that no one can find you. and you stay hidden until you hear normal voices, police, park rangers, people who sound safe. Can you do that for me? Mom, I don't want to leave you. Baby, I need you to be brave for me, the bravest you have ever been. Vincent was watching this exchange with amusement. How touching, but the boy isn't going anywhere. Alina looked directly into Vincent's eyes, seeing the madness there but also something else uncertain. He'd planned for resistance, for begging, for tears. He hadn't planned for calm acceptance. You know what the worst part of all this is, Vincent? Alina said conversationally. Christopher is going to grow up knowing exactly what kind of man his father really is. You can kill me, you can kill Tank, you can spin whatever story you want, but that boy is going to remember this night for the rest of his life. He's going to remember watching his father murder the people who loved him. He will understand eventually. When he's older, when he can see the bigger picture, he will hate you. Alina interrupted. The way he hates you right now in this moment will follow you for the rest of your life. Every time you look at him, you will see that hatred reflected back at you. For the first time since this nightmare began, Vincent's confidence seemed to waver. Alina pressed her advantage. Is that really what you want, Vincent? To be remembered as a monster? To have your son flinch every time you enter a room? Shut up. The gun trembled slightly in Vincent's hand. Christopher will never love you the way you want him to. Never. You have destroyed that possibility forever. Shut up. Vincent's scream echoed through the forest, and in that moment of lost control, Alina saw her chance. Now, Christopher, run. Christopher bolted like a startled deer, his small form disappearing into the forest shadows before Vincent could react. Vincent spun to follow the boy's movement, and Tank launched himself across the clearing despite his wounded shoulder. The two men collided with bone-jarring force, Tank's superior size and training overwhelming Vincent's momentary advantage. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun spinning away into the darkness as they struggled for dominance. Alina scrambled for Morrison's fallen weapon, her hands closing around the grip just as Vincent broke free from Tank's weakened grasp. Blood was streaming from Tank's shoulder now, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Alina, Tank gasped. The keys, get the truck. But Vincent was already moving, producing a second weapon from somewhere inside his jacket, a knife that gleamed wickedly in the moonlight. Alina raised Morrison's gun, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get a clear shot without risking Tank's life. Put it down, Alina, Vincent said, holding the knife to Tank's throat. Put it down or I open him up right here. Alina lowered the weapon, her mind racing through possibilities that all ended in disaster. Vincent was beyond reason now, beyond negotiation. The only thing keeping Tank alive was Vincent's need to maintain some semblance of his original plan. That's better, Vincent said. Now kick it away. Alina complied, watching helplessly as their last hope of self-defense went skittering across the forest floor. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent continued, his breathing still labored from the struggle. You are going to walk back to your truck. You are going to get in, and you are going to drive back to your little farmhouse in Cedar Ridge. Tank and I will follow in my car. And then Tank is going to kill you, Alina. A crime of passion. Domestic violence that escalated beyond control. Very tragic. But these things happen. Alina felt sick as she realized Vincent intended to force Tank to participate in her murder. The psychological torture of that, the way it would destroy Tank even if he somehow survived, was almost worse than the prospect of death itself. He will never do it, Alina said. Tank would die before he'd hurt me. Oh, I think he will, Vincent replied, pressing the knife deeper into Tank's throat, especially when I explain that Dylan's life depends on his cooperation. Alina saw Tank's eyes close in despair. Vincent had found the perfect leverage, the one thing Tank valued more than his own life or even Alina's. You are a monster, Alina whispered. I'm a father protecting his family, Vincent corrected. Now move. The walk back to the rest area felt like a funeral march. Alina's mind kept circling back to Christopher, alone in the dark forest, probably traumatized beyond repair but alive. That had to be enough. That had to count for something. Tank stumbled beside her, Vincent's knife at his back, blood still seeping from his shoulder wound. Alina could see him weakening with each step, could see the effort it took for him to keep moving forward. Their pickup truck sat exactly where they'd left it, looking mundane and innocent under the single light pole. Elena noticed Vincent's Honda was gone, probably moved to prevent them from using it as an escape route. "Get in," Vincent ordered. Elena drives. Tank in the passenger seat. Elena slid behind the wheel, her hands trembling as she started the engine. In the rearview mirror, she could see Vincent settling into the back seat, his knife still visible in the dim light. "Take Highway 18 south," Vincent directed. "Nice and easy. We wouldn't want to attract any unwanted attention." As Elena pulled out of the rest area, she found herself thinking about all the small decisions that had led to this moment. If she'd stayed in Seattle, if she'd called the police when Vincent first started making threats, if she'd trusted her instincts about the isolation of the farmhouse. But regret was a luxury she couldn't afford now. Christopher was alive, somewhere in the forest, and eventually someone would find him. He would survive this, even if she and Tank did. The drive to Cedar Ridge took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of Vincent's calm voice providing directions, while Tank slipped in and out of consciousness beside her. Elena found herself cataloging details, the license plates of passing cars, the faces of other drivers, anything that might later help investigators piece together what had happened. When they finally turned onto the familiar dirt road that led to the farmhouse, Elena felt a strange sense of homecoming. This place had been her sanctuary, her first real home as an adult. It seemed fitting somehow that it would also be her last. The house stood dark and silent among the winter trees, exactly as they'd left it that morning. Had it really been less than 24 hours since they'd fled to Seattle? It felt like a lifetime. "Pull around to the back," Vincent instructed, "away from the road." Elena complied, parking behind the house where the truck would be hidden from any passing traffic. Not that there was likely to be any. Their nearest neighbor was almost a mile away, and the dirt road was a dead end. "Now we go inside," Vincent said. "All of us together, one big happy family." Elena helped Tank out of the truck, alarmed by how much weight he was putting on her for support. His shirt was soaked with blood now, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Without medical attention soon, he would go into shock. Vincent produced a key from his pocket. Elena's key, she realized with sick understanding. He'd been inside their house, had been planning this for much longer than any of them had suspected. The familiar rooms felt alien and threatening now, shadows pooling in corners that had once felt cozy and safe. Vincent marched them directly to the bedroom, where Elena noticed with growing horror that he'd already made preparations. Plastic sheeting covered the floor and walls. Rope and duct tape sat neatly arranged on the dresser. A baseball bat leaned against the nightstand, its wooden surface already stained with something dark. "You have been busy," Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I told you, Elena, months of planning. I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." Tank raised his head with effort. "Where's Dylan? Where's my son?" Vincent smiled. "Safe and sound, for now. But his continued safety depends on your cooperation over the next few minutes." Elena realized she was looking at an elaborate torture chamber, designed not just to kill them but to maximize their suffering first. Vincent didn't just want them dead, he wanted them broken. "The rope is for Tank," Vincent explained conversationally. "Can't have him interfering while I work on you, Elena. The tape is to keep things quiet. We wouldn't want to disturb the neighbors." Elena looked around the room that had been her private sanctuary, trying to memorize details that might somehow be important later. Her eyes fell on the bedside phone, and she realized with a start that the line had been cut.
"You thought of everything," she said. "I try to be thorough." Tank was swaying on his feet now, his face white with blood loss. Elena realized he didn't have much time left, even without Vincent's intervention. "Vincent," she said, "Tank needs medical attention. If you want him conscious for whatever you have planned, you need to do something about that shoulder." "Actually, Elena, I think Tank's condition is perfect for what I have in mind. Weak enough to be manageable, conscious enough to watch." Elena felt bile rising in her throat as she understood the full scope of Vincent's sadism. He wasn't just planning to kill them. He was planning to make Tank watch Elena die slowly, knowing he was too weak to help her. "You sick bastard," Tank whispered, somehow finding the strength to take a step toward Vincent. Vincent produced the gun again, pointing it at Tank's chest. "That's close enough. Now, Elena, I want you to tie Tank to that chair. Nice and tight. Elena looked at the chair Vincent indicated. A heavy wooden piece that Tank would never be able to break free from in his weakened condition. Elena, Tank said quietly. Don't do it. Whatever he threatens, don't help him. But Elena was already moving toward the rope. She'd spent her career saving lives, and the calculations were simple. Tank would die from blood loss within the hour without medical intervention. If she could buy them time, even a few minutes, maybe Christopher would lead rescuers to them. That's my practical Elena, Vincent said approvingly, always thinking ahead. Elena began binding Tank to the chair, her movements deliberately slow and clumsy. Each second she could stretch out was another second for help to arrive, another second for some miracle to save. But as she worked, Elena found herself thinking not about rescue, but about Christopher, somewhere in the dark forest. By now he'd probably found his way back to the rest area, or maybe to the highway. Someone would find him, would take care of him, would make sure he grew up knowing he was loved. That would have to be enough. Tighter, Vincent ordered, pressing the gun against Elena's temple. I know what you are doing, and it won't work. No one's coming to save you. Elena pulled the ropes tighter, feeling Tank's muscles tense with pain. When she was finished, Vincent tested the bonds himself, nodding with satisfaction. Perfect. Now, Elena, I want you to understand something before we begin. Tank is going to watch everything I do to you, every cut, every burn, every broken bone, and he's going to know that it's happening because he failed to protect you. Elena saw Tank strain against the ropes, his face contorting with rage and despair. The chair creaked, but held firm. And then, Vincent continued, when you are finally dead, Tank is going to confess to killing you. He's going to write out a detailed confession, explaining how his jealousy and possessiveness led to this tragic moment. I will never, Tank started to say. Oh, but you will, Vincent interrupted, because Dylan's life depends on it. You see, I have someone watching the boy right now. If you don't cooperate fully, if you don't play your part perfectly, Dylan will suffer the same fate as his father. Elena felt the last of her hope crumble. Vincent had thought of everything, had planned for every contingency. There was no escape, no rescue, no miraculous salvation. All that remained was to die with as much dignity as possible. Vincent picked up the baseball bat, testing its weight thoughtfully. I think we will start slow, Elena. Work our way up to the more serious injuries. Give Tank plenty of time to appreciate the full scope of his failure. Elena closed her eyes and thought about Christopher, safe in the darkness of the forest. She thought about Dylan wherever Vincent was holding him. She thought about all the children she'd cared for over the years, all the small lives she'd helped preserve and protect. At least she'd made a difference. At least some good had come from her time on Earth. Vincent raised the bat, and Elena prepared to die. The explosion of splintering wood came from the front of the house, the sound of a door being kicked in with tremendous force. Vincent spun toward the bedroom door, his face shifting from satisfaction to alarm as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department. Anyone in the house? Identify yourself. Elena felt a surge of hope so powerful it was almost painful. Christopher had done it, had somehow found help, had led rescuers back to them. Stay quiet, Vincent hissed, raising the gun toward the bedroom door. Not a sound, but Tank was already shouting with what remained of his strength. We are in here. Bedroom. He's got a gun. Vincent spun toward Tank, rage contorting his features. You son of a... The bedroom door exploded inward as sheriff's deputies poured into the room, weapons drawn and ready. Vincent found himself facing 3 armed officers, his single handgun suddenly seeming inadequate for the situation. Drop your weapon. Now. For a moment, Elena thought Vincent might surrender. His face cycled through a series of emotions: anger, fear, calculation, desperation. Then his expression settled into something cold and final. If I can't have my family, he said quietly, then no one can. Vincent swung the gun toward Elena, his finger tightening on the trigger, but Tank's voice cut through the chaos with surprising strength. Vincent, Dylan's watching. Vincent hesitated, his eyes darting toward the bedroom window where a small face was pressed against the glass. Dylan, somehow escaped from wherever Vincent had been holding him, stood in the darkness outside their house with tears streaming down his cheeks. In that moment of hesitation, Deputy Johnson's rifle cracked like thunder. Vincent spun and fell, his gun clattering across the plastic sheeting as blood spread beneath him. Alina collapsed to her knees, the adrenaline that had been sustaining her finally giving way to exhaustion and shock. Around her, the bedroom filled with paramedics and crime scene technicians, their professional voices creating a comforting wall of normalcy. Tank was unconscious now, his body finally surrendering to blood loss, but the EMTs were already working on him with efficient competence. Alina heard one of them calling for a helicopter, discussing trauma protocols and blood types. "Ma'am?" "Alina Hartwell." Alina looked up to see Sheriff Davidson, his weathered face creased with concern. "We need to get you to the hospital, get you checked out." "Christopher," Alina managed. "My son, in the forest. We found him, ma'am, about 2 hours ago, at the rest area. He's the one who led us here. Brave kid, probably saved your lives." Alina felt tears streaming down her face as the full impact of their survival hit her. They were alive. All of them were alive. 3 months later, March 1994, Alina stood at the kitchen window of Rebecca's Seattle apartment, watching the early spring rain create patterns on the glass. Tank was beside her, his left arm still in a sling, but healing well according to the doctors. His recovery had been touch and go for the first few weeks, but physical therapy was working miracles. Dylan and Christopher were in the living room, engaged in an animated discussion about their upcoming return to Cedar Ridge. The boys had adapted to the trauma with the resilience of childhood, but Alina knew they would all be dealing with the psychological aftermath for years to come. "The realtor called this morning," Tank said quietly. "We got a full-price offer on the house." Alina nodded. They'd agreed to sell the farmhouse, to start fresh somewhere without the memories of that terrible night. The insurance money would be enough for a down payment on something smaller, safer, closer to civilization. "Any regrets?" Tank asked. Alina considered the question seriously. The farmhouse had been her sanctuary, her first real home as an adult, but sanctuaries, she'd learned, were only as safe as the people who knew about them. "No," she said finally. "No regret." Vincent Cross had died on the operating table at Cedar Ridge General, his injuries too severe for the rural hospital's resources. Alina felt no satisfaction in his death, only a tired relief that the threat he represented was finally over. Detective Morrison had survived his leg wound and was cooperating fully with the investigation. His testimony had revealed the extent of Vincent's manipulation, the way he'd gradually drawn the detective into his web of obsession and revenge. Sarah Chen had been found 2 days after the confrontation, locked in the basement of an abandoned cabin 20 miles from the rest area. Vincent had convinced her that Tank was planning to kill Dylan, that only by hiding could she protect her son. The psychological trauma of those 2 days had required extensive therapy, but she was slowly recovering. "The kids want to see the new house this weekend," Tank said. "Think you are ready for that?" Alina smiled, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been tight for months. "I think I am." They'd found a place in Edmonds, a suburb north of Seattle, with good schools and neighbors close enough to provide safety without sacrificing privacy. It wasn't the isolated sanctuary of Cedar Ridge, but Alina was beginning to understand that true safety came from community, not isolation. "Tank," Alina said, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to face her, his dark eyes serious with concern. "I love you," she said simply. "Not just for protecting us, not just for surviving. I love you for who you are, for the life we are building together." Tank pulled her close with his good arm, and Alina breathed in his familiar scent, cedar shavings, and diesel fuel, and something uniquely him that she could never quite name. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean and preparing the ground for new growth. In the living room, the boys' laughter provided a soundtrack of hope and resilience. Alina closed her eyes and allowed herself to believe, for the first time in months, that they were truly safe, that they could build a life free from the shadows of Vincent Cross's obsession, that love really could triumph over hatred, if you were brave enough to fight for it,
The nightmare was finally over, but in the depths of Cedar Ridge General Hospital's morgue, a clerical error would soon be discovered. The body that had been cremated as Vincent Cross belonged to someone else entirely, a John Doe who had died in a car accident the same night. Vincent Cross's actual body was missing from the morgue, along with all records of his admission and treatment. And in a small town 3 states away, a man bearing a remarkable resemblance to Vincent was settling into a new life under a new name, waiting patiently for the right moment to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Some nightmares, Elena would learn, never truly end. They only sleep, waiting for the perfect moment to begin again.